Okay, so have you ever stopped to think? I mean, does human history actually have a direction, like a final destination?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, and if it does, where are we, right now on that path? Imagine that moment, the end of the 20th century, all those wars, ideologies, it felt like something huge was ending.
A real sense of flux, and that question just hung there.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into Francis Fukuyama's, well, let's face it, hugely influential and pretty controversial book, The End of History and the Last Man.
And Fukuyama, he suggests there are these two really powerful forces pushing history along.
Okay.
He calls one the logic of modern natural science. That's kind of the engine of progress, technology, economics, expanding our desire.
Right, the material side.
Yeah, and the other one, he calls it the struggle for recognition. This is more, well, Hegel saw it as the real motor of history. It's about our fundamental need, like deep down, to have our worth, our dignity acknowledged by others.
Okay, so two big engines driving things. Our mission, then, in this deep dive, is basically to give you a solid handle on this really ambitious book. We'll unpack his arguments, look at how they kind of played out in the real world after he wrote it, and wrestle with some of the, frankly, surprising, maybe even unsettling conclusions he comes to. By the end, you should have a really good grasp of why this whole idea grabbed so many people, especially right after the Cold War ended.
Definitely. It landed with a huge impact.
So to really get Fukuyama's point, you kind of have to step back and feel the mood, right? The huge shift from the, wild optimism of the 19th century to the really deep pessimism that colored so much of the 20th. Think about the 1800s. There was this widespread belief, almost faith, that modern science, it would conquer disease, poverty, nature would basically serve us.
Yeah, total confidence. And democratic governments, they were just expected to spread everywhere. The ideals of 1776, the French Revolution, they were going to beat the tyrants. That was the thinking.
People even looked at things like Napoleon's wars and saw them as socially progressive. Can you believe that?
It seems wild now, but yeah. And then reality hit. Those expectations just got completely shattered. World War I was just this massive turning point. Paul Fussell nailed it, called it a hideous embarrassment to the prevailing meliorist myth. That idea, we're always getting better.
Hard to leave in progress when tens of thousands are dying daily for a few yards of mud.
Exactly. It discredited all those old values, loyalty, patriotism, the whole bourgeois setup. Think of Remarque's soldier in All Quiet on the Western Front. Just utter disillusionment. His teachers, the ones who should have guided him, he felt they'd just broken everything.
And then came the totalitarian nightmares.
Right. Hitlerism, Stalinism, Pol Pot, just unbelievable horrors. And science itself, the supposed engine of progress, suddenly you've got nuclear weapons, massive environmental damage. It felt like it turned against us.
Which brings up a terrifying point. The Holocaust. It happened in Germany, highly industrialized, highly educated. If it could happen there, what guarantee was there it couldn't happen anywhere else?
Yeah.
It really shook the whole idea of historical progress to its core.
Absolutely. The 20th century made those easy claims about progress through science and tech just, really problematic. Because without moral progress, what stops technology from being used for absolute evil?
Yeah, clearly nothing.
And the intellectual crisis just got deeper because nobody could agree on where humanity was even going. Liberal democracy was fighting for its life against fascism, communism, completely different ways of organizing society.
I remember reading Kissinger in the 70s warning the communist challenge was unending.
Exactly. And Revel in '83 even wondered if democracy was just, a historical accident, a brief parenthesis.
Wow.
A lot of people on the right genuinely thought the Soviets, with Leninism, had figured out the secret to permanent power, controlling huge populations forever.
But here's where it gets really fascinating looking back.
Yeah.
We kind of missed the signs, didn't we? The actual crisis happening inside those dictatorships.
You did.
The collapse of authoritarianism started way earlier than most people thought. Those right-wing regimes in Southern Europe, mid-70s.
Portugal 74, Greece 74, Spain 75.
Turkey in the early 80s. And what's striking is how relatively peaceful those transitions to democracy were. Suddenly, they're holding free, multi-party elections.
And Fukuyama puts his finger on a key weakness here, what he calls a failure of legitimacy. These authoritarian regimes, they just didn't have a believable long-term reason to rule. They often had to say, oh, we're just temporary, just transitional.
Like in Portugal.
Exactly. The dictatorship didn't just collapse because of a losing colonial war. Crucially, its own military turned on it. And you had the pull of, modern Western Europe, consumer culture, all that, plus a surprisingly resilient civil society. Parties, unions, the church, they rallied for democracy.
In South Africa.
A similar legitimacy crisis. Apartheid started losing support even among whites, partly because it just wasn't working economically.
Right.
Leaders like de Klerk had to admit, look, the economy needs millions of black workers in the cities permanently. The ideology couldn't sustain itself against reality.
Then the big one, the collapse of communism.
It's supposed
A supposed unending challenge.
Ah.
I love that anecdote about the Soviet kid in the 60s dreaming of eating pineapples on the moon in 81.
Right. While in reality, they couldn't even get enough tomatoes.
The gap was just huge. The Soviet civilian economy was actually shrinking.
And by the late 80s, the smart people inside the Soviet system, the economists, they knew. They understood central planning was killing them.
How did people live with those failures for so long?
Well, look at China. Deng Xiaoping's reforms in '78. They basically brought back private property, opened up to global capitalism.
Yeah.
It was a massive admission that socialist central planning had failed. And in Eastern Europe, where the Soviet system was forced on them, totalitarianism crumbled even faster. In places like Poland, civil society wasn't totally wiped out. Farming wasn't fully collectivized. The church stayed pretty independent.
So pockets of resistance remained.
Exactly. And local nationalism kept the memory of pre-communist times alive. Once the Soviets signaled they wouldn't step in militarily, poof, the whole communist apparatus just lost its nerve, completely demoralized.
So much for the new man they were trying to create.
Yeah, that totally failed. The elites that emerged in the Soviet Union and China, they ended up looking a lot like Western elites. They liked Western consumer goods, Western political ideas. Turns out, people, adults who can tell truth from lies and who want recognition for their own autonomy.
Okay, so all these threads, the fall of right-wing dictators, the collapse of communism, where does that lead us?
It leads to what Fukuyama calls the worldwide liberal revolution.
Oh.
You saw this huge shift, for example, in Latin American economic thinking. They stopped just blaming global capitalism for everything.
Right, the old dependency theory.
Exactly. And instead, they started embracing market competition, opening up their economies. Mexico, Argentina, Brazil. Huge liberalizations.
And then you had Asia?
Oh, yeah, the Asian tigers, or NIEs, newly industrialized economies, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. They were the proof in the pudding, really. They deliberately went for export-led growth, plugged into foreign markets, foreign capital, and the growth rates were just astonishing.
Can you give an example?
Sure, look at Taiwan versus mainland China. They started at roughly the same living standard in 1949. By 1989, Taiwan's per capita GNP was, $7,500?
Wow, and China?
China's was about $350, and a lot of that growth was already thanks to Deng's market reforms.
Stark difference.
Or North versus South Korea. Started about equal in 1960. By '89, after South Korea embraced economic liberalism, its per capita GNP was more than 4 times North Korea's.
So the message was pretty clear.
Extremely clear. Capitalism wasn't just for the West. It looked like a path to development, potentially open to everyone, even countries starting late.
Okay, let's dig into Fukuyama's actual core arguments now. Starting with that first motor, you mentioned the logic of modern natural science.
Right.
This is basically the economic technological drive, right?
Yeah.
Pushing us to satisfy more and more desires through rational means.
Exactly. And a key thing here is how science and technology tend to push societies towards uniformity.
How so?
Well, think about warfare. Kind of paradoxically, war has often forced modernization.
Okay.
Like those big centralizing monarchies in the 16th, 17th centuries. They needed strong states to fund armies, or Meiji Japan rapidly modernizing after getting basically smacked down by Western tech.
Right, Commodore Perry.
Yeah. And Russia's modernization over centuries, it's almost always been driven by military needs and failures. Peter the Great, after the Crimean War, after the Russo-Japanese War, the need for better military tech forces states to organize themselves more rationally.
Okay, so military competition drives technological and social organization. What about just, like, regular economic life?
Well, the demands of rational production, rational labor, they dictate huge social changes too. Industrial societies, they need cities, they need workers who can move around. That inherently breaks down older structures. Tribes, clans, extended families.
So the mafia's traditional base in Spain, for example.
Right. Fukuyama points out it was basically eroded by modern market relationships. People's loyalties shifted.
Huh.
So this economic logic helps explain why developed countries have, office workers, not farmers, unions, not tribes, like people obey bureaucrats, not priests, in their daily economic lives.
Okay, that makes sense. Science and economics push us towards a certain kind of modern society.
But, and this is a really important but from Fukuyama, while this logic kind of points us towards the promised land of liberal democracy, it doesn't actually get us there on its own. Meaning there's no strictly economic reason why advanced industrialization must lead to political freedom. You can absolutely have advanced capitalism alongside authoritarianism. Think Meiji Japan again, or Bismarck's Germany, or even modern examples like Singapore, maybe Thailand at times.
Authoritarian states can even grow faster economically sometimes.
They absolutely can, for periods. So the economic engine isn't the whole story for Fukuyama.
Which brings us to the second motor. The struggle for recognition.
This is the Hegelian part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is where it gets really deep philosophically. Hegel's insight was this. Animals desire things, physical objects, food, shelter, humans. We desire something more abstract. We desire the desire of other humans. We want to be recognized as human beings, beings with worth, with dignity.
Okay.
And this desire, Hegel says, leads to this primordial fight, not for food, but for pure prestige. Individuals willing to risk their actual lives just to be recognized. He saw this as the very first glimmer of human freedom, the willingness to overcome our basic animal instincts for survival.
And that struggle creates?
It creates the master-slave relationship. The loser, who chooses life over prestige, becomes the slave, the winner, the master. Right. But then something interesting happens. The slave, forced to work, interacts with nature, transforms it. And through that work, the slave actually masters nature and starts to understand the idea of freedom.
Huh. So the slave's consciousness actually becomes higher.
In a way, yes. More self-aware, the slave reflects on their lack of freedom, on the concept of freedom, while the master just enjoys their status. Then Christianity comes along, and for Hegel, it makes this vision of universal freedom clear. God recognizes all humans equally.
But Hegel had issues with that too.
Yeah, he saw it as a slave ideology in a sense. Why? Because it promised liberation only in the afterlife, in heaven, not here on earth. He saw it as a kind of alienation, humans creating a god and then enslaving themselves to that creation.
Okay, so how does this all connect back to liberalism and the end of history?
Because for Hegel, and Fukuyama follows him here, liberalism isn't just about making life comfortable, getting rich, like maybe Hobbes or Locke emphasized.
It's more than just satisfying desires. Much more. It's a reciprocal and equal agreement between citizens to recognize each other's dignity, universally, rationally. It's the system that potentially satisfies both our basic desires and this deeper need for recognition, our thymos.
Thymos. Okay, explain that.
Thymos is a term from Plato. It's like spiritedness, anger. It's the part of the soul that feels pride, self-worth. It's what gets angry when we feel slighted or disrespected.
Okay.
It's this drive for recognition, this pride that makes us human, makes us willing to risk things for ideas, for status, not just survival. And it has two sides. Megalothymia, the desire to be seen as superior, the ambition of a Caesar, a Napoleon, the master.
Right.
And isothymia, the desire to be recognized as equal to everyone else.
And early liberalism, Hobbes and Locke.
Yeah.
They had a problem with the first one.
Big time. They saw megalothymia, that desire for glory, for superiority, as dangerous, the cause of conflict.
So they tried to get rid of it.
Pretty much. They wanted to replace that aristocratic pride with calculation, self-interest, reason, turn the warrior into the peaceful businessman.
And the critique was?
The critique, famously from Nietzsche later, was that this created men without chests, people who were maybe rational, maybe comfortable, but lacked pride, assertiveness, greatness. They were just desire and reason, nothing more.
This is Nietzsche's last man.
Exactly, the ultimate bourgeois. Content with comfort and security, no drive to be more, no great passions or risks, just hollow.
Wow. Okay, but bringing it back to the real world, you can see this recognition thing playing out, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. Think about revolutions, people throwing off dictators. Is it just about wanting more stuff?
Usually not, no. It's about dignity, ending oppression.
Right. Remember Václav Havel's example of the greengrocer putting up the communist slogan he didn't believe in?
Yeah.
Havel said the greengrocer felt shame. Not just fear. Fear is natural, but shame, sense of degradation of his human dignity. Communism fundamentally failed to satisfy that need for recognition. It forced people into these constant moral compromises.
And the anger in East Germany when Honecker's luxury was revealed?
It wasn't just, he has nice things and we don't. It was the hypocrisy. The deep offense to their sense of fairness, their dignity, or Tiananmen Square. China was opening up economically. People were getting wealthier. But the students, they wanted a voice. They wanted to be recognized as adults with opinions that mattered.
So this struggle for recognition helps explain things beyond just revolutions.
Definitely. Fukuyama uses it to look at things like nationalism. Nationalism isn't purely rational, is it?
Not really, no. It's emotional.
It's thymos on a massive scale. Whole nations demanding recognition, demanding their place in the sun, willing to fight for it.
And even the work ethic.
Yeah, think about it. Is the Japanese salaryman working 80 hours a week just for the paycheck? Or those early Protestant capitalists Max Weber wrote about?
Probably not just the money.
Right. There's pride involved. Status. Recognition from your company, your community, your nation. It's not purely economic calculation.
Or the U.S. Civil Rights Movement.
A perfect example. Was it only about economic opportunity? No. It was fundamentally about recognizing the equal dignity of Black Americans, fulfilling that promise of universal recognition.
Okay, so given these two motors, science economics and the struggle for recognition and seeing authoritarianism collapse, Fukuyama starts asking the big question.
Right. Is this just a temporary win for liberal democracy? Or is this part of a bigger pattern? Is history actually going somewhere specific?
Is there a universal history?
That's the question. And Fukuyama suggests, yeah, maybe there is. He argues modern science provides the mechanism. Its progress gives history a direction, a coherence. You see this global culture emerging, right, centered on technology, economic growth, the kind of capitalist structures needed for it.
And societies that try to resist.
They end up fighting rearguard actions. Tokugawa Japan, the Soviet Union, Mao's China, they try to wall themselves off. But eventually they're either militarily defeated by superior tech, or they get seduced by the sheer glittering appeal of the material world science creates.
So the totalitarian temptation was just a detour.
For many, Fukuyama argues, it was a disease of the transition, a temporary, ultimately doomed attempt to fight the inevitable logic of modernity.
Okay, but what is the link between that economic development and actual democracy? You said earlier it's not automatic.
It's not automatic, but it's definitely not accidental either. Look at Southern Europe again, Spain, Portugal, Greece. They liberalized their economies, saw rapid growth, which led to more urbanization, higher education levels, people getting a taste for consumer culture.
Creating the conditions for democracy.
Exactly. It creates the social basis where pluralism can actually take root and thrive. Like that Spanish official who basically predicted democracy would come when per capita income hit $2,000.
And it did right before Franco died.
Pretty much spot on. And you see similar things in Asia.
Japan.
Japan modernizes first, gets democracy first. Taiwan, South Korea, high education, rising incomes. Then significant political liberalization followed.
Yeah, then South Africa.
Yeah, the Afrikaner community itself changed. They went from being relatively poor and rural to being urban, educated, white-collar. That exposed them to global norms, leading eventually to de Klerk's reforms.
The Middle East is like the exception, though. High income in some places, but not much democracy.
Fukuyama explains that largely by oil, the rentier state phenomenon. They can buy the trappings of modernity with oil money.
Without needing the social changes that come from developing their own population's productivity and education.
Precisely. The oil wealth bypasses that transformative process.
So why else do democracies tend to succeed in developed countries?
Well, they're arguably just more functional. Think about complex issues like the environment.
Yeah.
Democracies allow for feedback, participation. They can better balance growth and environmental protection, ideally, dictatorships. They can just order huge projects that lead to disasters like Chernobyl with no public input.
Right, and leadership change.
That's another key thing. Long-term dictatorships often degenerate when the founder dies. You get power struggles, instability. Democracy provides rules, institutions for changing leaders and policies without, burning the whole house down each time.
But Fukuyama still insists the reason people choose democracy isn't mainly economic.
Right, that's crucial. Modernization creates fertile ground, but the spark is often something else. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, they happened before the Industrial Revolution really took off.
Yeah.
And the choice of prosperity without liberty, it's always been there. 19th century Germany, contemporary China or Singapore. You can have growth without democracy. But people consistently risk everything for democratic rights. It's clearly not just about the money. It goes back to that desire for recognition, for dignity.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. International relations. How does Fukuyama challenge the standard view, the realist view?
Realism. Think Kissinger or Morgenthau.
The idea that states are just billiard balls, always seeking power, and what's inside them doesn't really matter.
Pretty much. Russia will be expansionist, whether it's run by czars or Bolsheviks. That's the realist line. Power politics is eternal.
And Fukuyama says?
He says that's too simple, too reductionist. It misses history with a capital H. Internal politics, the nature of the regime, absolutely matters.
How so?
Well, look around. Do all states just maximize power relentlessly? The Greek colonels just gave up power. The Argentine junta stepped down after the Falklands. Britain voluntarily dismantled its empire. Turkey gave up its imperial dreams.
They didn't fit the pure power maximizer model.
Not at all. And then there's the whole democratic peace theory.
Which says?
That stable liberal democracies very, very rarely fight wars against each other. They seem to find other ways to deal with ambition, with megalithymia, or maybe it just fades away in stable democracies.
And the end of the Cold War itself. Gorbachev.
A prime example for Fukuyama, the Soviet new thinking under Gorbachev, the stuff that led to tearing down the wall, that wasn't driven by some shift in material power balance. It was a fundamental ideological shift, a change in ideas.
So ideas matter, regimes matter.
Hugely. Realism misses that whole dimension.
So if realism is incomplete, what's Fukuyama's picture of the future global order?
He sees a world potentially splitting in two. You've got the post-historical world, meaning the established, stable, liberal democracies. Think North America, Western Europe, Japan, maybe. They're linked by economics, by law, like NATO or the EU. The big ideological questions are settled for them. History, in the sense of struggle over fundamental principles, is kind of over.
Okay, the post-historical zone and the other part.
That's the historical world. Places still caught up in the old struggles, nationalism, religion, ideology, border disputes, where history is still very much happening.
And where do these two worlds clash?
Well, a couple of key places. One is oil. Most of the oil is in the historical world.
But the post-historical world desperately needs it.
Exactly. Instant friction point. The other major one is immigration.
People moving from the historical to the post-historical world?
Right. A constant flow from unstable, poor countries to the rich, stable ones. This guarantees the post-historical world can't just ignore the historical world. They'll be involved either trying to manage the flow or because the immigrants themselves push for engagement with their old homelands.
Okay. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that liberal democracy has won the big ideological fight. Is that it? Is the story over? Are we actually satisfied?
That's the million-dollar question Fukuyama tackles in the last part of the book. Is the kind of recognition we get in modern liberal democracy, is it actually completely satisfying, or does it leave something missing?
And he sees challenges from both left and right?
Exactly. The left critique is basically that capitalism, even liberal democratic capitalism, never achieves true equal recognition isothermia.
Because?
Because there will always be inequalities. Differences in talent, luck, the social value placed on different jobs. Brain surgeon versus garbage collector. Even poverty in rich countries becomes less about absolute material lack and more about dignity, relative status.
Now, that tension between liberty and equality.
Fukuyama says it's necessary and ineradicable. You can't have perfect equality without squashing liberty, as the Marxist attempts showed, leading to monstrous states that denied all recognition.
Okay, that's the left critique. What about the right? This goes back to Nietzsche, right? The last man.
Precisely. The Nietzschean critique is that modern democracy isn't the peak. It's the victory of slave morality. It produces the last man.
Remind us again. The last man is?
The person who has traded pride, ambition, the desire for superiority, megalithymia, for mere comfortable self-preservation. They're the men without chests. Rational, maybe. Tolerant, probably. But hollow. No great aspirations. No willingness to risk things for higher ideals. Just content with their rights and their comfort.
And Nietzsche has viewed this with contempt.
Utter contempt. If this is the end point of history, he thought, then maybe history wasn't worth it.
But does Fukuyama think recognition just disappears in an equal, abundant society?
No, interestingly, he suggests the opposite. Universal recognition might actually be stimulated by more equality and prosperity, because the desire for recognition is fundamental. And even in the best liberal society, natural inequalities in talent and ability will persist. People will still strive. And think about how much effort modern society has put into addressing not just physical disadvantage, but the insult to dignity.
Like wheelchair accessibility.
Exactly. Making all buses accessible costs way more than just providing special vans. Why do we do it? It's not just logistics. It's about recognizing equal dignity, protecting people's thymos from being wounded by their difference.
So if liberal democracy is going to last, if it's not going to just fizzle out into the last man, it needs outlets for these drives.
Yes. It needs healthy outlets for both isothymia, equality, and megalothymia, the desire to excel, to be superior.
Yeah.
And it needs to foster a sense of community.
Okay, what kind of outlets does he see?
Well, a big one is economic activity, entrepreneurship.
How is that an outlet for megalothymia?
Because capitalism doesn't just allow, it demands a kind of regulated and sublimated megalothymia. Businesses strive to be the best, to beat the competition. Think of great entrepreneurs, Ford, Carnegie. Was it just about buying more stuff? Or was the money a symbol of their success, their ability, a pursuit of a kind of non-military glory?
Risking everything for an idea.
Yeah, they stake their fortunes, their reputations for these bigger, intangible goals. That's thymotic energy at work.
Okay, economics is one. What else?
Democratic politics itself. Running for office, campaigning, that's pure competition for public recognition. It's thymotic.
But doesn't modern politics kind of dampen that? Checks and balances, bureaucracy?
It does. Modern constitutions are designed to tame ambition, not unleash it. Leaders often end up as managers, not heroic figures. And with political parties often converging on policy, maybe there's less room for truly grand, ambitious visions to find an outlet in politics compared to, say, revolutionary times.
What about smaller scale stuff?
Yeah.
Community.
Crucial. This is where Fukuyama brings in Tocqueville, those mediating institutions, civil society.
Like what? Unions, churches, clubs.
Exactly. Political parties, unions, charities, hobby groups, religious congregations. Tocqueville saw them as schools for democracy. They provide recognition on a more personal level. You're not just citizen X, you're valued for your specific contribution to this group.
Even the family.
Absolutely. For many people, the family is the primary community where they find deep meaning, recognition, and are willing to sacrifice megalothymia in service of loved ones.
But here's a potential problem Fukuyama raises. Can liberal societies sustain these communities on their own?
That's the worry. Often the strong communities that democracy relies on, think religious groups with strong moral codes, actually draw their values from sources outside of pure liberalism.
Right. Liberalism emphasizes individual rights, tolerance.
Which is great. But those principles, taken to an extreme, can sometimes weaken the shared values and bonds that hold strong communities together. Self-interest, rightly understood, might not be enough in the long run.
Okay, one last big area. The last man and the willingness to fight, to risk things.
Right. Even Hegel worried that just peace and prosperity wouldn't be enough for human pride. Maybe the state needs conflict, needs military service to keep that spirit alive.
Like the weird enthusiasm for World War I initially.
Fukuyama suggests that partly reflected a desire to escape the perceived dullness of bourgeois life, to feel part of something bigger, a national community, citizenship in action.
But the 20th century taught a brutal lesson about that.
Oh, yeah. Unbridled megalothymia led to industrialized slaughter. War became this anonymous, meaningless death machine. It actually undermined traditional ideas of courage and heroism. It created alienation, not glory.
So we circle back to Nietzsche's critique. The last man is at our fate. Comfortable, tolerant, but empty.
It's a provocative thought. Nietzsche saw modern education creating relativism. People become broad-minded, sure, not fanatical, but maybe without strong convictions, without believing anything is worth fighting or dying for.
The last man sits at home, congratulating himself on being smarter than past generations who fought over silly things like religion or nation.
Right. He knows better than to risk his life. But is that all there is? Fukuyama mentions Pascal, the brilliant mathematician who gave it up for religious contemplation. It suggests there might be deeper longings that mere comfortable self-preservation can't touch.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
Really diving into Fukuyama's The End of History and The Last Man. We've seen how he traces history's path, pushed by science and this deep human need for recognition. We looked at why liberal democracies seem to triumph so spectacularly at the end of the 20th century.
But also the internal tensions, the critiques, the things that still might leave us unfulfilled.
Right, and those big questions about what truly satisfies us as human beings.
And it's important to remember, Fukuyama's end of history wasn't meant necessarily as like a perfect utopia.
Yeah.
It was more like maybe the big ideological arguments about the best way to organize society are settled. Liberal democracy won. But that human desire for recognition, especially megalithemia, the desire to be more than just equal, that doesn't just go away. It still needs somewhere to go.
Which leaves us with a really interesting, maybe slightly unsettling final thought to chew on. What happens if modern science keeps telling us we're not that special? That there's no fundamental difference between humans and nature, we're just, organized slime.
Does that pull the rug out from under our whole concept of unique human dignity? Our right to recognition, our right to master nature?
And at the same time, what if modern education does keep pushing relativism, teaching us that there's no ultimate reason to believe liberal democracy is definitively better than anything else?
If there's no final ground for belief, as Fukuyama puts it, can liberal democracy remain stable long-term?
And will that last man, content in his comfort and tolerance, will he truly ultimately be satisfied?
Any questions?
Definitely. But hopefully, you now have a much better toolkit to think about them and maybe even dive into Fukuyama's work yourself.